The silver moonlight cast long shadows across the parched yard, as Willow Montgomery stared at the foreclosure notice nailed to her front door. Her grandfather's ranch, her only inheritance and last connection to her family, would belong to Dawson Banking and Trust by this time tomorrow, unless she could somehow conjure $500 out of the empty Oklahoma sky. She had until dawn, merely 6 hours to save everything that mattered. Enid, Oklahoma, 1883, was not kind to a woman alone. Willow brushed a stray auburn curl from her face, her 23-year-old shoulders already bearing the weight of 3 years of solitary struggle. Since her grandfather's passing, she'd worked the modest cattle operation alone, facing drought, rustlers, and now the ruthless ambitions of Theodore Dawson, the bank's owner who had his eye on expanding his holdings in the territory. She sank onto the porch steps, the weathered wood creaking beneath her. The ranch wasn't much a small herd of cattle, a modest 2-bedroom house, a barn that leaned slightly to the left after last spring's storms, but it was hers. Or it would be, if she could make the payment that had mysteriously doubled since her last visit to the bank. "I won't let you take it," she whispered to the darkness, though her words carried no conviction, only desperate hope. The night air was still, the sounds of distant coyotes carried on the breeze. She'd sold everything of value: her mother's silver, her grandfather's pocket watch, even her best horse. She'd begged for extra work in town, but the drought had hit everyone hard. No one had money to spare, especially not for a woman determined to run a ranch on her own. Willow stood and walked to the well, drawing up a bucket of water to splash on her face. Sleep would not come tonight. She would spend these final hours on the land she loved, memorizing every hill and hollow before Dawson's men arrived to throw her belongings into the yard. A distant sound made her freeze. Hoofbeats. At this hour, her hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Rustlers had grown bold with the drought, taking advantage of desperate ranchers too broke to hire proper hands. She wouldn't lose what little remained of her herd on her last night here. The rider approached slowly, his silhouette gradually taking shape against the starlit prairie. A tall man on an even taller horse, moving with purpose but without the hurried pace of someone with ill intent. Still, Willow raised her rifle, aiming steadily. "That's far enough," she called when the stranger was within earshot. "State your business or turn around." The horse stopped, and the rider raised both hands slowly. "I mean no harm, madam. Name's Gabriel James. I'm looking for the Montgomery place." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not quite local. In the moonlight, she could make out a broad-brimmed hat and the glint of what might be a marshal's badge or a gun. "You found it," Willow replied, not lowering her rifle. "Though by sunrise it'll be Dawson property. If you're here to get an early start on the eviction, you can ride right back to town." The stranger Gabriel swung down from his saddle with surprising grace for such a tall man. As he stepped into a patch of moonlight, Willow could see him more clearly. He wasn't wearing a lawman's badge after all, just a simple bandana around his neck. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into distant horizons. He couldn't be more than 30, but life had carved experience into his features. "I'm not with the bank, Miss Montgomery. May I approach? It's a long story, and I'd rather not shout it across your yard." Willow hesitated, then lowered the rifle, not completely, but enough to signal cautious permission. 5 steps forward, then stop. He nodded and did as instructed, his spurs jingling softly with each measured step. When he stopped, he reached slowly into his vest pocket and withdrew something that caught the moonlight. "I believe this belongs to your family," he said, extending his hand to reveal a small silver medallion on a chain. "Your grandfather saved my life once. I've come to return the favor." Willow's breath caught. The medallion, her grandmother's prized possession, lost years ago, dangled from the stranger's fingers. Her grandfather had searched for it until his dying day. "How did you come by that?" she demanded, a tremble in her voice betraying her shock. Gabriel's expression softened. "Like I said, it's a long story. The short version is that John Montgomery pulled me from a river when I was just a fool kid trying to cross in flood season. This fell from his pocket during the rescue. I've been carrying it for years, meaning to return it, but the trail drives kept taking me farther west. I only learned of his passing when I rode through Fort Worth last month." He took another step forward, then stopped when she tensed. "I also learned about your situation. The bank calling in loans across 3 counties, foreclosing on good land at a fraction of its worth." Willow swallowed hard. "And what business is that of yours, Mr. James?" "None directly," he admitted. "But I owe John Montgomery a debt I can never fully repay. So I'm here to settle what I can." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. $500, enough to pay off the bank and keep them away from your door for a good while." Willow's rifle barrel dipped as shock washed through her. "500? I don't understand. Why would you? Like I said, I owe your grandfather my life, and I've had some luck at the tables in Dodge City." His mouth curved in a slight smile. "Consider it repayment of a debt long overdue." Suspicion flooded back. In her experience, men didn't ride up in the dead of night offering salvation without expecting something in return. "And what do you want for this generosity, Mr. James? A share of my ranch? A place in my—" "Nothing," he interrupted firmly. "The money is yours with no strings attached. Pay the bank, keep your land. I'll be on my way come morning." The sincerity in his voice made her waver. Could she trust this stranger? Did she have any choice? Dawn was approaching, and with it, the end of everything she'd fought to keep. "How do I know this isn't some trick?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Gabriel sighed, then slowly placed both the medallion and the money pouch on the ground before taking 2 steps backward. "You don't. But I'm not in the business of tricking women out of their homes, Miss Montgomery. I'm just settling an old debt." Willow stared at the items on the ground, then back at the tall cowboy. His eyes held steady on hers, patient and undemanding. Something about him, perhaps the quiet dignity in his stance or the respect with which he kept his distance, made her want to believe him. "Why wait until the last moment?" she asked. "You could have come days ago." "I only arrived in the territory yesterday. Rode straight through from Wichita when I heard Dawson was accelerating the foreclosures." He glanced toward the eastern horizon, where the faintest lightening of the sky had begun. "We don't have much time if you want to beat the bank men to town." Willow made her decision. She lowered the rifle completely and stepped forward to retrieve the medallion and money. The familiar weight of her grandmother's keepsake in her palm brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, meeting Gabriel's gaze directly for the first time. In the dim light, she could see his eyes were a deep, steady blue, like the sky after a storm has passed. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We still need to get that money to the bank before Dawson's men show up here." "They're coming at dawn," she said, glancing nervously at the lightening horizon. Gabriel nodded. "Then we'd best hurry. Can you ride?" "Since before I could walk," Willow replied, a hint of pride breaking through her wariness. "Give me 2 minutes to change." She hurried inside, heart pounding with a strange mixture of fear and hope. The money felt impossibly heavy in her hand, salvation delivered by a stranger in the night. She quickly changed from her nightdress into a riding skirt and blouse, pinned up her hair, and grabbed her father's old hat. When she emerged, Gabriel was waiting with both his horse and her mare saddled and ready. "You work fast, Mr. James," she observed, tucking the money securely inside her bodice. "Time is something we don't have much of," he replied, offering a hand to help her mount. She ignored it, swinging smoothly into the saddle without assistance. A flicker of something appreciation perhaps crossed his face before he mounted his own horse. They set off at a gallop toward town, the first pale fingers of dawn reaching across the eastern sky. Willow's thoughts raced faster than the hoofbeats beneath her. Who was this man, really? Why had he appeared exactly when she needed someone most? And why did the simple act of riding beside him in the pre-dawn light feel strangely, impossibly right? Enid was just stirring as they thundered down the main street. A few early risers shopkeepers opening their doors, the blacksmith already at his forge, turned to stare at the unusual sight of Willow Montgomery riding hard alongside a tall stranger. The bank wouldn't open for normal business for several hours yet, but Willow knew Theodore Dawson would be there early, preparing to dispatch his men to claim her ranch. His personal residence sat behind the bank itself, a grand two-story affair that showcased his status as the town's wealthiest citizen. They dismounted in front of the imposing brick building with its polished brass fixtures. Gabriel tied both horses to the hitching post while Willow straightened her skirts and took a deep breath. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, clutching the money pouch tightly. "Thank you for getting me here, but this part I need to handle alone." He looked like he might argue, but then nodded. "I'll wait here, just in case." Just in case of what, he didn't specify, but Willow was oddly comforted by the knowledge that he wouldn't abandon her yet. She squared her shoulders and marched to the bank's side door, the one she knew led directly to Dawson's private office. She knocked firmly, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo in the quiet morning air. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Theodore Dawson himself, already dressed in a fine suit despite the early hour. His thin face registered first surprise, then displeasure at the sight of her. "Miss Montgomery," he said coldly, "I believe my men are scheduled to visit your property this morning. There's no need for you to embarrass yourself further by begging for extensions we cannot provide." Willow met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to beg, Mr. Dawson. I'm here to pay my loan in full." Disbelief crossed his face, quickly followed by suspicion. "That's impossible. The amount due is $500, she interrupted, pulling the pouch from her bodice. "I believe this will cover it with interest." She opened the pouch and poured the gold coins onto his desk. The soft clink of metal on wood was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Dawson stared at the money, then back at her, his narrow face flushing with anger. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "No woman runs a failing ranch one day and produces $500 the next without what, Mr. Dawson?" came Gabriel's voice from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his posture casual but his eyes hard as flint. "I'd be very careful about your next words if I were you." Dawson's gaze flickered between them, calculation replacing anger. "I see," he said finally. "How fortunate for you to find such timely assistance, Miss Montgomery." "The money's legitimate," Willow said firmly, "and more than covers what I owe. I want a receipt showing the loan paid in full, and I want it now." For a moment, Dawson looked as though he might refuse, but Gabriel's quiet presence in the doorway seemed to change his mind. With stiff movements, he counted the coins, wrote out a receipt, and thrust it toward her. "Your loan is satisfied," he said tightly. "Though I wonder how long you'll manage before you're back at my door." Willow took the receipt, careful not to let her fingers brush his. "Don't concern yourself with my future, Mr. Dawson. I won't be doing business with your bank again." She turned and walked out, heart pounding but head held high. Gabriel followed, closing the door firmly behind them. Outside, the sun had cleared the horizon, bathing the street in golden morning light. "That man is trouble," Gabriel observed quietly as they untied their horses. "You don't know the half of it," Willow replied. "He's been trying to piece together the largest cattle operation in the territory. My land sits right between two parcels he already owns." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. "Explains his eagerness to foreclose. Men like him don't take kindly to having their plans disrupted. Let him be unhappy," Willow said with more confidence than she felt. "The ranch is mine now, free and clear." She looked up at Gabriel, really studying him in the daylight for the first time. His features were strong and weathered, but there was kindness in the lines around his eyes. "I still don't understand why you did this." He mounted his horse before answering. "Like I said, a debt repaid. Your grandfather was a good man." "He was," she agreed, climbing into her own saddle. "And apparently a better judge of character than I gave him credit for, if he saw something worth saving in a strange boy at a river crossing." Gabriel's smile was brief but genuine. "I wasn't worth much then. Just another restless kid running from home to find adventure." Finding a raging river instead nearly ended that adventure before it began. They rode back toward the ranch side by side, the morning sun warming their backs. The tension that had coiled in Willow's chest for weeks began to loosen. Her land was safe for now, at least. "What will you do now, Mr. James?" she asked as they passed the town limits and headed into open country. He considered for a moment. "I hadn't thought beyond getting here in time. I suppose I'll head back toward Kansas. There's usually work to be found with the cattle drives." Willow hesitated, then made a decision that surprised even herself. "You could stay. Just for a few days," she added quickly when he glanced at her. "The bunkhouse isn't much, but it's shelter, and I'd like to hear more about how you came to know my grandfather. It would be payment of sorts for your help." Gabriel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Are you certain that's wise, Miss Montgomery? A single woman inviting a stranger to stay on her property might raise eyebrows in town." "I stopped caring about raised eyebrows the day I decided to run the ranch alone," Willow replied with a slight smile. "Besides, after riding in with you at dawn, the gossips will be busy regardless of what I do next." That drew a chuckle from him. "Fair point. In that case, I accept your offer." For a few days, they rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats punctuated by meadowlarks calling from the tall grass. Willow found herself stealing glances at her unlikely savior, wondering what kind of man traveled hundreds of miles to repay a debt to someone who was no longer alive. As they crested the final rise before her property, the familiar sight of her grandfather's her ranch spread out before them. The morning sun illuminated the weathered buildings and the small herd of cattle grazing in the distance. It wasn't much compared to the grand operations further west, but seeing it now, knowing it remained hers, filled her heart with fierce joy. "It's beautiful country," Gabriel remarked quietly. "It is," Willow agreed. "Harsh sometimes, but beautiful in its own way." She turned to him, suddenly needing him to understand. "My grandfather came here when there was nothing but open prairie. He built every structure by hand, planted every tree. This land isn't just property to me, it's my history. My future." Gabriel nodded, his eyes scanning the modest spread with genuine appreciation rather than judgment. "A place worth fighting for." "Yes," she said simply. "Thank you for helping me keep it." They rode down to the ranch house as the day brightened around them. For the first time in months, Willow felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The threat of foreclosure was gone, at least for now. She had time to make the ranch profitable again, to prove that a woman alone could succeed where many men had failed. And for a few days at least, she wouldn't be completely alone. As they dismounted in front of the barn, Willow felt the weight of exhaustion from the sleepless night settle over her. Gabriel took the reins of both horses, his movements easy and practiced. "Get some rest, Miss Montgomery," he said gently. "I'll see to the horses and make myself acquainted with the bunkhouse." "Willow," she corrected him. "If you're staying, even briefly, you might as well use my name." A smile touched his eyes. "Willow," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her heart beat a little faster. "Then I'm Gabriel, not Mr. James." She nodded, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. "The bunkhouse hasn't been used in some time. There are clean linens in the chest at the foot of the bed. I've slept under the stars more nights than not. A roof and a bed will be luxury enough." Willow walked to the house, feeling his eyes on her back. At the porch, she turned. "Will you join me for supper? It's the least I can offer." "I'd be honored," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. Inside her kitchen, Willow leaned against the door and took a deep breath. The events of the night and morning seemed dreamlike now, the mysterious appearance of a stranger with exactly the sum she needed, the recovery of her grandmother's lost medallion, the satisfaction of seeing Theodore Dawson's plans thwarted. And now that same stranger would be staying on her property, sleeping in the bunkhouse, taking meals at her table. It was improper by any standard of society, but Willow found she didn't care. Propriety hadn't saved her ranch, Gabriel James had. She moved to the basin and splashed cool water on her face, trying to wash away the fatigue. Through the window, she could see Gabriel leading the horses into the barn, his movements sure and efficient. There was something comforting about watching a capable man at work on her land, something she hadn't realized she'd missed since her grandfather's passing. But comfort could be dangerous, she reminded herself. Gabriel had made it clear he would stay only a few days. She wouldn't allow herself to grow accustomed to his presence, to depend on his help. She'd survived 3 years alone. She would continue to do so after he rode away. Still, as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Willow couldn't help but wonder what stories he would share over supper. What kind of man her grandfather had seen worth saving all those years ago. And why, despite all good sense, she felt safer with a stranger on her property than she had in years. She fell asleep with the medallion clutched in her hand, dreaming of raging rivers and a tall cowboy with eyes the color of the Oklahoma sky. The smell of coffee woke her. For a disoriented moment, Willow thought her grandfather was still alive, making his morning brew in the kitchen below. Then reality settled around her, the medallion still in her palm, the events of the night rushing back. Gabriel must have found the coffee and started a pot. The thought of him moving about her kitchen should have felt intrusive, but somehow didn't. She dressed quickly in a simple blue work dress and pinned her hair in a practical knot before heading downstairs. She found Gabriel at the stove, his back to her, as he tended to something in a cast-iron skillet. He'd removed his hat and coat, and in the afternoon light, she'd slept far longer than intended. She could see that his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "You didn't have to cook," she said by way of greeting. He turned, unsurprised by her presence, as if he'd heard her approach. "Seemed the least I could do. Hope you don't mind me raiding your pantry." "Not at all." Willow moved to the cupboard for plates, acutely aware of how domestic the scene must appear, like they were a long married couple rather than strangers thrown together by circumstance. "What are you making?" "Just bacon and eggs. Simple trail cooks fare, I'm afraid." "It smells wonderful." And it did better than anything she'd bothered to make for herself in months. Since her grandfather's death, meals had become utilitarian affairs, sustenance rather than pleasure. Gabriel plated the food and carried it to the small kitchen table while Willow poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. They sat across from each other, the afternoon sun streaming through the window and casting golden light across the worn wooden surface. "Thank you," she said after taking her first bite. The food was simple but perfectly cooked. "It's nothing," he replied with a slight shrug. "Learn to cook out of necessity. Men on cattle drives get mighty particular about their meals. You've been on many drives?" Willow asked, genuinely curious. Gabriel nodded. "Started as a wrangler when I was 17, worked my way up to trail boss by 25, moved from Texas up through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Montana." His eyes took on a distant look. "Seen more country than most men twice my age." "What made you choose that life?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. He was quiet for a moment. "Didn't exactly choose it. After your grandfather pulled me from that river, I needed work. Cattle Drive was hiring. One job led to another, and before I knew it, 10 years had passed." He glanced up at her. "What about you? Most women I've met wouldn't choose to run a ranch alone." Willow's chin lifted slightly. "Most women haven't had the chance to try. My grandfather raised me to believe I could do anything a man could do except perhaps lift the heavier hay bales." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. "When he died, everyone expected me to sell, move to town, find a husband, live a proper life. But this land is in my blood. I couldn't give it up, even when the bank came calling, especially then." She looked down at her plate. "Though I nearly failed, if you hadn't arrived when you did, you'd have found another way," Gabriel said with such certainty that she looked up in surprise. "Something I've learned about survivors, they find a way, and you strike me as a survivor, Willow Montgomery." The use of her full name sent an unexpected warmth through her. High praise from a man who's crossed half the country on horseback. Just an observation. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood what it meant to face the world alone. The moment was broken by the distant sound of approaching horses. Gabriel was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to potential danger. "3 riders," he reported, his voice suddenly all business. "Coming fast." Willow joined him at the window, her heart sinking as she recognized the lead horse. "That's Lawrence Bailey, Dawson's foreman," she said. "And those are his men." Gabriel's expression hardened. "Stay inside, I'll handle this." "This is my property," Willow countered, already heading for the door. "I'll handle it." He caught her arm gently. "Together then," he compromised. "But let me do the talking, at least at first. Men like Bailey respond better to other men." Willow wanted to argue but knew he was right. In the 3 years she'd run the ranch, she'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting, and dealing with men's prejudices was often one of them. "Fine," she conceded, "but I won't cower in my own home." They stepped onto the porch just as Bailey and his men pulled up in a cloud of dust. The foreman was a burly man with a perpetual scowl and knuckles scarred from too many fights. His companions were cut from the same cloth, hired muscle chosen for brawn rather than brains. "Miss Montgomery," Bailey said, his tone falsely pleasant as he removed his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Surprised to find you still here." "I imagine you are," Willow replied coolly. "Considering I paid my loan in full this morning." Bailey's eyes shifted to Gabriel, taking his measure. "And this would be the mysterious benefactor we've heard about. Name's Lawrence Bailey, Mr. James," Gabriel supplied, not offering his hand. "Gabriel James." "Is there something we can help you with, Mr. Bailey? Or did you ride all this way just to confirm Miss Montgomery's financial situation?" Bailey's false smile disappeared. "Mr. Dawson sent me to deliver a message." He wants to remind the lady that running a ranch requires more than just clearing a debt. It takes manpower, equipment, capital. His gaze swept dismissively over the modest property. Things a woman alone simply can't provide. I've managed for 3 years, Willow said, stepping forward despite her earlier agreement to let Gabriel handle things. And I'll continue to do so. With what hands? Bailey challenged. Your cattle are half wild, your fence is falling down, and every cowboy in the territory knows Dawson won't hire anyone who works for you. Gabriel crossed his arms, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Sounds like your boss is going to extraordinary lengths to make life difficult for Miss Montgomery. Makes a man wonder why. Just business, Bailey replied with a smirk. Nothing personal. It feels very personal from where I'm standing, Willow said. Bailey shrugged. Mr. Dawson wanted me to extend an offer. He's still willing to buy your property at a fair market price, considering its deteriorated condition. He pulled an envelope from his vest pocket and held it out. The offer's in writing. I suggest you consider it carefully. Before Willow could respond, Gabriel stepped forward and took the envelope. We'll review it, he said neutrally. Is that all? Bailey's eyes narrowed at the "we," and Willow could almost see him recalculating the situation. A woman alone was vulnerable. A woman with a capable-looking man by her side was less so. For now, Bailey said, gathering his reins. But Mr. Dawson isn't known for his patience, or for making the same offer twice. He nodded to his men, and they wheeled their horses around. Over his shoulder he called, "By the way, Miss Montgomery, strange thing happened this morning. Seems someone cut your south fence line. Might want to check on your cattle." With a harsh laugh, the 3 men galloped away. Willow's face paled. The south pasture, that's where the best grazing is. I have at least 20 head down there. Gabriel was already striding toward the barn. I'll saddle the horses. I'll get my rifle, Willow added, hurrying back into the house. Within minutes, they were mounted and racing toward the south boundary of her property. Willow led the way, her heart pounding with anger and fear. If Bailey's men had scattered her cattle, it could take days to round them up, days she couldn't afford to lose with the ranch in its current state. When they reached the fence line, Willow's worst fears were confirmed. A 30-foot section of barbed wire had been cleanly cut, the posts knocked over. Hoof prints in the soft earth told the story several riders had driven her cattle through the gap and onto the open range beyond. Bastards, she muttered, dismounting to examine the damage. Gabriel swung down beside her, kneeling to study the tracks. 4 riders, he said grimly, drove your cattle southeast. He looked up, eyes scanning the horizon. If we move fast, we might catch up before they scatter them too widely. Willow nodded, already back in her saddle. There's a creek about 3 miles that way. They'll likely head for water. Gabriel mounted smoothly and adjusted his hat. Lead on. They rode hard across the prairie, following the obvious trail of a small herd driven at speed. Willow's jaw was set in determination, her eyes focused on the horizon. Gabriel matched her pace, occasionally studying the ground to confirm they were still on the right track. After nearly an hour of riding, they crested a rise and Willow pulled up sharply, pointing. In the valley below, near the creek she'd mentioned, they could see her cattle and 2 riders still with them. Bailey's men, she said quietly, probably waiting for nightfall to drive them farther. Gabriel nodded, his expression grim. They're not expecting pursuit so soon. He reached for the rifle in his saddle holster. How do you want to handle this? Willow appreciated that he asked rather than assuming command. Direct approach, she decided after a moment's thought. They're on my land, stealing my cattle. I want them to see me coming. A smile tugged at Gabriel's mouth. Yes, madam. They rode down the slope at a measured pace, making no attempt to conceal their approach. Willow's rifle was across her lap, Gabriel's in his hand. The two rustlers spotted them when they were about 100 yards out. One reached for his gun, but the other, evidently the smarter of the two, raised his hands quickly. "That's far enough," the armed man called when they were within speaking distance. "This ain't your concern, mister. These cattle belong to Miss Montgomery," Gabriel replied evenly. "That makes it very much our concern," the man sneered. "Ain't no brands I can see, could be anybody's strays." "My brand is clear enough," Willow said, her voice carrying across the distance. "And you know it, just as I know you're working for Bailey and Dawson." "Prove it," the man challenged, his hand still hovering near his pistol. "I don't need to prove anything on my own land," Willow replied. "But I'm willing to be reasonable. Ride away now, leave my cattle, and I won't report this to the sheriff." The two men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Gabriel shifted slightly, positioning his horse to better cover Willow if shooting started. "Bailey ain't gonna like this," the second man muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. "Bailey doesn't have to face a rustling charge," Gabriel pointed out. "You do." That seemed to decide the matter. Even in Oklahoma territory, where law was sometimes applied unevenly, cattle rustling was taken seriously. The armed man slowly lowered his hand. "Fine," he said sourly. "Take your scrawny cows, but this ain't over. Not by a long shot." "It's over for today," Gabriel replied firmly. "Now ride out, and tell Bailey if there's any more trouble at the Montgomery ranch, he'll answer to me personally." The threat hung in the air, made more effective by Gabriel's calm delivery. The two men mounted up and rode away, casting dark glances over their shoulders. When they were out of sight, Willow let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That could have gone badly. Gabriel nodded, returning his rifle to its scabbard. "But it didn't. You handled yourself well." "We handled it well," she corrected, feeling an unexpected surge of partnership. "Now we just need to get these cattle back and repair that fence before nightfall." The work took the remainder of the day. Driving the cattle back was relatively straightforward, but repairing the fence properly required posts, wire, and tools from the barn. By the time the last section was secure, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. Willow straightened, pressing a hand to the small of her back. Despite years of ranch work, her muscles protested the long hours of digging post holes and stretching wire. Gabriel worked beside her, his movements efficient despite what must have been his own fatigue after riding through the previous night. "Thank you," she said as they gathered their tools. "I couldn't have done this alone, not in one day." He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "All part of the service," he replied with a small smile. On the ride back to the house, Willow found herself studying her companion in the fading light. He sat easy in the saddle, as if born to it, his profile strong against the sunset sky. There was something profoundly comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel less alone than she had in years. "What will Dawson do next?" Gabriel asked, breaking into her thoughts. Willow sighed. "Something worse. He's not a man who gives up easily, especially when his pride is involved. And you've wounded his pride by keeping your land." "By existing," she corrected wryly. "Theodore Dawson doesn't believe women should own property, run businesses, or generally think for themselves. My grandfather used to say Dawson was born a century too late." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "Men like that are dangerous when crossed." "I'm aware," Willow replied, more sharply than she intended, "but I won't be bullied off my own land." "I didn't suggest you should be," Gabriel said mildly. "Just that we should be prepared for what comes next." The "we" caught her attention. "You said you were only staying a few days." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the dimming light. "That was before Dawson's men cut your fence and scattered your cattle. Seems to me you might need an extra hand around here a little longer than I first thought." Willow wanted to protest that she could handle things herself, but the events of the day had proven otherwise. Pride was well and good, but practicality had kept her alive and her ranch running for 3 years. "I can't pay much," she admitted. "Barely enough to cover your meals." "I'm not asking for payment," Gabriel replied. "Consider it an extended repayment of my debt to your grandfather." They reached the house as true darkness fell. In the yard, Gabriel dismounted and came around to offer Willow a hand down. She hesitated only briefly before accepting, acutely aware of his strength as he helped her from the saddle. "Thank you," she said again, wondering why the simple phrase felt so inadequate for all he'd done. "You're welcome, Willow," he replied softly, and in the gentle way he said her name, she heard something that made her heart beat a little faster. For a moment they stood close together in the darkness, his hand still holding hers. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should see to the horses." Willow nodded, suddenly aware of how improper their situation might appear to an observer. A single woman and a man she barely knew, alone on an isolated ranch. Yet she couldn't bring herself to care about propriety. Gabriel James had saved her home, helped recover her cattle, and offered to stay and help further without asking anything in return. Perhaps her grandfather had been right to trust this man all those years ago. Perhaps she was right to trust him now. "I'll start supper," she said, heading toward the house. "And Gabriel," she turned back to find him watching her, his expression softened by the rising moonlight. "I'm glad you're staying." His smile was brief but warm. "So am I." The next week established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Gabriel rose before dawn to tend to the morning chores while Willow prepared breakfast. They worked together during the days, repairing fences, checking on the cattle, and making improvements to the barn that had been neglected for too long. In the evenings, they would share simple meals at her kitchen table, talking long into the night. Gabriel told stories of his travels, the vastness of Montana, the rugged beauty of Wyoming, the bustling cattle towns of Kansas. Willow described her childhood on the ranch, her grandfather's wisdom, her dreams of expanding the herd when times were better. Little by little, Willow found herself revealing things she'd told no one else: her fears of failing, her loneliness since her grandfather's death, her determination to prove the doubters wrong. And Gabriel listened with a quiet attention that made her feel truly heard for the first time in years. In turn, he shared more of his own story. He'd grown up in eastern Texas, the son of a shopkeeper who expected his boy to follow in his footsteps. But Gabriel had yearned for open spaces and adventure, running away at 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back and a stolen horse he later returned. "That's when I met your grandfather," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. "I was trying to cross the Red River during spring floods, young and stupid and certain I knew better than the locals who warned against it." Willow smiled, imagining her grandfather's reaction to such foolishness. "And he happened to be there." Gabriel nodded. "He was traveling back from Texas with a string of horses he'd purchased. Saw me get swept downstream when my horse lost its footing. He rode parallel to the river for nearly a mile before finding a place to get in and pull me out." He touched his vest pocket, where Willow knew he kept the medallion she'd returned to him after that first night. "This fell from his pocket during the rescue. By the time I noticed it, he was already moving on. I tried to catch up, but he was traveling faster than I could on foot." "So you kept it all these years," Willow said softly, "intending to return it. It became a sort of talisman, Gabriel admitted. A reminder that there were good men in the world willing to risk themselves for strangers. He glanced at her. Your grandfather didn't just save my life that day. He gave me my first real job afterward, letting me help with those horses all the way to Oklahoma. Taught me more in 2 weeks than my father had in 16 years. Willow felt tears prick her eyes. That sounds like him. He never could resist a stray. Gabriel smiled. Is that what I am? A stray? Maybe we both are, Willow replied, surprising herself with the candor. Two people who don't quite fit where society thinks they should. His eyes held hers in the gathering darkness. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. As the days passed, Willow found herself growing increasingly aware of Gabriel's presence. The way sunlight caught the auburn highlights in his dark hair when he worked without his hat. The strength in his hands as he mended tack or built new fence posts. The deep timbre of his laugh on the rare occasions she managed to amuse him. She told herself it was merely gratitude and the natural camaraderie that developed between people working closely together. But in quiet moments when their hands brushed while passing tools or their eyes met over the supper table, she recognized the flutter in her chest for what it was: attraction, pure and simple, and dangerous. Gabriel would leave eventually. He was a man accustomed to horizons, not homesteads. She couldn't afford to let her heart become entangled with someone who would inevitably ride away. On the 8th day after Gabriel's arrival, they rode into Enid for supplies. Willow had avoided town since paying off her loan, but they needed provisions, and she was determined not to let Dawson's influence keep her away. The stares and whispers began the moment they tied their horses outside the general store. Willow held her head high, ignoring the curious glances and disapproving frowns from the town's more respectable matrons. Gabriel walked beside her, his presence both reassuring and, she had to admit, the cause of much of the gossip. Inside the store, Mrs. Whitaker, the owner's wife, made a show of adjusting her spectacles to peer at them. Miss Montgomery, she said with barely concealed curiosity, we haven't seen you in some time. I've been busy with the ranch, Willow replied politely, handing over her list of supplies. Mrs. Whitaker's eyes darted to Gabriel, who was examining a display of tools nearby. So I've heard. And who might your assistant be? The hesitation before assistant made the woman's implication clear. Willow felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. Mr. James is a friend of my late grandfather's. He's been kind enough to help with some repairs. How fortunate for you, Mrs. Whitaker murmured, her tone suggesting she believed nothing of the sort. Though I must say, dear, appearances can be so important for a young woman alone. People do talk. Let them, Willow said simply. I need those supplies by noon if possible. Leaving Mrs. Whitaker flustered by her directness, Willow moved to join Gabriel. The welcome wagon has arrived, she muttered under her breath. He glanced at the storekeeper's wife, who was now whispering to another customer while looking in their direction. Should I wait outside? Absolutely not, Willow replied firmly. I won't give them the satisfaction. Gabriel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Brave woman. Stubborn woman, she corrected. There's a difference. They completed their shopping and were loading supplies into saddlebags when Willow noticed Theodore Dawson emerging from the bank across the street. He spotted them immediately, his thin face hardening before he crossed the dusty road with determined strides. Miss Montgomery, he said coldly, ignoring Gabriel completely. I assume you've considered my offer. Willow straightened, meeting his gaze directly. I have, Mr. Dawson. The answer is no. My land is not for sale at any price. Dawson's lips thinned. I advise you to reconsider. Running a ranch is difficult business. Accidents happen, cattle sicken, fences fail. "Is that a threat?" Gabriel asked quietly, stepping closer to Willow's side. Dawson finally acknowledged him with a dismissive glance. "Merely stating facts, Mr. James, Gabriel James." "Ah, yes, the mysterious benefactor." Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've made quite an impression in our little town, Mr. James. People wonder where a drifter cowboy might acquire such funds." "People should mind their own business," Gabriel replied evenly. "In small towns, Mr. James, everything is everyone's business." Dawson turned back to Willow. "A word of advice, Miss Montgomery. Men who appear out of nowhere with bags of gold often disappear just as quickly, usually after they've gotten what they want." Willow felt rather than saw Gabriel tense beside her. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Dawson, but I'm quite capable of judging character for myself." Dawson's gaze dropped to where her hand rested on Gabriel's arm, and something ugly flashed in his eyes. "Indeed. Well, when your judgment proves flawed, as I suspect it will, my offer remains open, though the price may not be as generous next time." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy and walked away, his back rigid with anger. "That man is trouble," Gabriel said, echoing his assessment from their first encounter with Dawson. Willow sighed, finishing the last of the packing. "He always has been. But he's also powerful in this town. Most people won't cross him openly. You do." She met his eyes with a small smile. "I'm not most people." "No," Gabriel agreed softly. "You're certainly not." They rode out of town in companionable silence, both lost in thought. Willow couldn't shake the feeling that Dawson's threats were more than just words. He wasn't a man accustomed to losing, and in his mind, she had defeated him twice now, first by paying her loan, then by refusing his offer. Her concerns proved justified 3 days later, when they discovered the creek that watered the eastern pasture had been dammed upstream on Dawson's property. The small but vital water source that had sustained her cattle through previous dry spells was reduced to a muddy trickle. "Can he do this legally?" Gabriel asked as they examined the earthwork dam that diverted the water onto Dawson's land. Willow ran a hand through her hair in frustration. "Water rights are complicated in the territory. Since the creek originates on his property, he could argue it's his to use as he sees fit. Even if it means your cattle die of thirst, even then." She kicked at a stone, sending it splashing into the pitiful remains of the creek. "He knows exactly what he's doing. Without this water source, I'll have to drive the herd to the north pasture early. The grazing there isn't ready yet. They'll strip it bare in weeks, not months." Gabriel studied the dam thoughtfully. "It wouldn't take much to breach it, and give Dawson legal cause against me." Willow shook her head. "That's what he wants. He's trying to provoke me into doing something that would justify retaliation." "Then we find another way," Gabriel said with quiet determination. "There must be an alternative water source we can develop." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, looking for natural springs or locations where a well might be dug. By sunset, they had identified a promising site in the southern section of the ranch, where a slight depression in the land and the presence of certain plants suggested water might lie not too far below the surface. "It will take time and labor to dig a proper well," Gabriel warned as they rode back to the house. "And there's no guarantee we'll hit water." "It's still our best option," Willow replied. "We can start tomorrow." That night, a spring thunderstorm rolled across the prairie, bringing welcome rain but also keeping Willow awake with its fury. Unable to sleep, she wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and made her way downstairs to the kitchen for tea. She was surprised to find Gabriel already there, seated at the table with a cup of coffee, watching the storm through the window. He was in his shirt sleeves, his hair slightly mussed, and the domesticity of the scene made her heart catch. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, something in his expression shifting at the sight of her in her nightclothes, hair loose around her shoulders. "The storm," he said simply, standing. "I can leave if you'd prefer." "No," Willow said quickly. "Stay, I was just making tea." She moved to the stove, acutely aware of his presence behind her. "I've always loved thunderstorms, even as a child. My grandfather used to say they were the sky having a good argument with itself." Gabriel smiled at that. "Mine said they were angels bowling." "I like that," Willow replied, pouring hot water over the tea leaves, "though I'm not sure what the lightning would be." "The strikes, of course," Gabriel said with mock seriousness. "Angels are competitive." The absurdity of the image made Willow laugh, the sound bright against the drumming rain. When she turned back to the table, Gabriel was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You should laugh more often," he said quietly. "It suits you." Willow felt heat rise in her cheeks. There hasn't been much cause for laughter lately. "No," he agreed, his eyes still on her face, "but there could be in time." She sat across from him, cradling her cup between her hands. "Is that what you've found in your travels, Gabriel, causes for laughter?" "Sometimes," he replied thoughtfully. "Though the trail can be a lonely place, even surrounded by other men." He looked down at his coffee. "I've seen more country than most, but I'm not sure I've really belonged anywhere since leaving home." The admission held a vulnerability that touched Willow deeply. "Do you ever think about going back to Texas?" He shook his head. "There's nothing for me there now. My parents died years ago, the store sold to another family." He met her eyes again. "What about you? Ever think about leaving the ranch, finding an easier life?" "Every day," she admitted with a small smile. "And every day I decide to stay, this land is." She gestured helplessly, trying to find words for what the ranch meant to her. "It's part of me. I don't know who I'd be without it." Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's worth fighting for." A particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the windows. Willow started, nearly spilling her tea. "That was close," Gabriel observed, rising to look out the window. "Storm's right overhead now." Willow joined him, their shoulders nearly touching as they watched the rain lash against the glass. The night outside was alternately pitch black and brilliantly lit, the landscape transformed by water and light. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Terrifying but beautiful." Gabriel turned to look at her, so close now that she could feel the warmth of him. "Yes," he said softly, and she knew he wasn't talking about the storm. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with exquisite slowness, Gabriel raised his hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and calloused and achingly gentle. "Willow," he said, her name a question and a prayer. She answered by closing the distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a whisper of contact that sent electricity through her veins more powerful than the lightning outside. Then Gabriel's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and tentative became certain, whisper became declaration. When they finally parted, Willow was breathless, her hands resting on the solid planes of his chest. Gabriel's eyes were dark with an emotion that made her heart race. "I shouldn't have done that," she said, though she made no move to step away. "You regret it?" he asked, his voice rough. Willow shook her head slowly. "No, but I should." Gabriel's thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "Because I'm a drifter, a man with no roots and no future to offer." "Because you'll leave," she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "Everyone does, eventually." Pain flashed across his face. "Is that what you think of me? That I'm just passing through your life? Isn't that what you've been doing for the past 10 years? passing through places, never staying. He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the rain against the roof and their mingled breathing. Maybe I've been looking for something all this time without knowing what it was. Hope fluttered in Willow's chest, dangerous and fragile. And now I'm not so sure I want to keep looking. His hands framed her face with infinite care. Willow Montgomery, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known, brave and stubborn and beautiful beyond words. She closed her eyes against the emotion his words evoked. Gabriel, let me finish, he said gently. I came here to repay a debt, but I've found something I never expected. A woman who stands her ground against all odds, a place that feels more like home than anywhere I've been in 10 years of wandering. He drew a deep breath. I can't promise I'll never leave. That would be a lie, and I won't lie to you. But I can promise that if I do, it won't be because I want to. It will be because I must. Willow opened her eyes, finding his gaze steady on hers. That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me, she murmured. Honesty is all I have to offer, Gabriel replied. That and whatever strength I can lend to your fight. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. For how long? For as long as you'll have me. The storm outside was beginning to move away, the thunder more distant now. In its wake, a strange calm settled over the kitchen, over Willow's heart. She had spent 3 years defining herself by her independence, her ability to stand alone. The thought of leaning on someone else, of letting someone share her burdens, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I can't offer much either, she said finally. The ranch barely sustains itself, let alone 2 people, and I won't give it up, not even for, she stopped, afraid of saying too much. Gabriel's smile was gentle. For me, I would never ask that of you, Willow. This land is your heart. I can see that clearly. But you're a man used to open spaces, to freedom. Could you really be content here, fencing and branding and the same views day after day? He glanced out the window, where the rain had softened to a steady patter. I've had 10 years of different horizons. Maybe it's time to find out what it means to wake up to the same one, watching it change with the seasons instead of with the miles. Willow felt something shift inside her. A piece of herself she hadn't known was missing, sliding into place. I'd like that, she whispered, rising again to meet his lips with hers. This time, the kiss held promise rather than question, certainty rather than exploration. When they parted, Gabriel's eyes were warm with an emotion Willow was beginning to recognize in herself. It's late, he said reluctantly. You should try to get some sleep. Willow nodded, knowing he was right but unwilling to break the spell of the moment. Will you be here in the morning? The question held more meaning than its simple words. Gabriel seemed to understand, his hands tightening slightly on her arms. I'll be here, he promised. Tomorrow and the day after that, for as many days as you'll have me. She stepped back, gathering her shawl around her. Good night, Gabriel. Good night, Willow. She climbed the stairs to her room with his eyes following her, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the challenges that still faced them. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and waiting for dawn. The next morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having left the earth refreshed rather than damaged. Willow dressed with particular care, pinning her hair in a style that was practical but more flattering than her usual severe knot. She told herself it was merely appreciation for the fine weather, but the flutter in her stomach when she heard Gabriel moving about the kitchen below belied that explanation. He glanced up when she entered, a smile warming his features. Good morning. Good morning, she replied, suddenly shy in the daylight. Last night's confession and kisses seemed almost dreamlike now. But then Gabriel moved to her, brushing his lips against her cheek in a gesture both chaste enough for daylight and intimate enough to make her pulse quicken. "I was thinking," he said, returning to the stove where he was preparing breakfast, "about our water problem." Willow blinked at the practical shift in conversation, though she was grateful for it. There was work to be done, regardless of what had changed between them. The well site. Yes, but also about the creek. He placed a plate of eggs and bacon before her. Dawson's Dam might not be as legal as he thinks. There's territorial law about riparian rights that gives downstream users some protection, especially for established water sources. Willow paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "How do you know about territorial water law?" Gabriel shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've worked on enough ranches to pick up a few things." Had a foreman in Wyoming who was always fighting with the neighboring spread over irrigation rights. Made us all learn the statutes in case we had to testify. "You continue to surprise me, Mr. James," Willow said with a small smile. "I aim to keep doing so, Miss Montgomery," he replied with a wink that made her cheeks warm. Over breakfast, they formulated a plan. Gabriel would ride into town to consult with Judge Wilson, a fair-minded man who had been friendly with Willow's grandfather. Meanwhile, Willow would begin preparations for the well, marking the site and gathering the necessary tools. "Be careful in town," Willow cautioned as Gabriel prepared to leave. "Dawson has ears everywhere." "I'll be discreet," he promised, checking his saddle cinch. He hesitated, then pulled her close for a brief, fierce kiss. "Don't work too hard while I'm gone." "No promises," she replied, smiling up at him. She watched him ride away, a tall figure against the morning sky, and allowed herself a moment of pure happiness, despite the challenges that still faced them. Then she turned to her tasks with renewed determination. The day passed quickly. Willow marked the well site, checked on the cattle, and repaired a section of fence damaged in the storm. By mid-afternoon, she was hot, dusty, and looking forward to Gabriel's return. When the sound of approaching horses reached her, she straightened from her work with a smile that quickly faded when she realized there were multiple riders and Gabriel wasn't among them. Lawrence Bailey led a group of 5 men, all wearing expressions that made Willow's hand move instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the fence post. "Afternoon, Miss Montgomery," Bailey called with false cheerfulness. "Don't trouble yourself with that rifle. We're just here to talk." "Then talk," Willow replied, not moving her hand from the weapon. "From there." Bailey held up his hands in mock surrender. "Now, is that any way to treat visitors, especially when we're here on legitimate business?" "What business?" Bailey nodded to one of his men who produced an official-looking document. "Court order signed by Judge Wilson himself. Says we have the right to inspect the property line between your land and Mr. Dawson's. Seems there might be some discrepancies in the survey." Willow's stomach clenched. Property line disputes could drag on for months, tying up legal rights to both parcels of land. It was a common tactic used by land grabbers throughout the territory. "There are no discrepancies," she said firmly. "The boundary has been established for 20 years. "Well, that's for the courts to decide now," Bailey replied with a smirk. "Meanwhile, we'll just have a look around if you don't mind, or even if you do, the order gives us that right." Willow wanted nothing more than to order them off her land, but she knew that defying a court order, even one almost certainly obtained through Dawson's influence, would only give them ammunition against her. "Fine," she said tightly. "Inspect all you want. But stay away from my cattle and my house." Bailey touched his hat with mocking politeness. "Whatever the lady wishes." He signaled to his men, and they spread out, riding toward the eastern boundary where her land met Dawson's. Willow watched them go, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. This was a new tactic, more subtle than cutting fences or damming creeks, and potentially more devastating. If Dawson could tie up her property in legal disputes, he could effectively prevent her from using or improving significant portions of it. She was still standing by the fence, rifle now firmly in hand, when Gabriel returned an hour later. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, dismounting quickly. Willow explained about Bailey and the court order. Gabriel's expression darkened with each word. "Judge Wilson would never have signed such an order without evidence," he said when she finished. "And I just spoke with him in town. He made no mention of any property dispute." "Then the order is forged," Willow concluded. "But how do we prove that?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. "We ride into town right now and show the judge. If Bailey and his men are still on your property when we return with the real law, they'll be the ones facing charges." It was a sound plan, but Willow hesitated. "I don't want to leave the ranch unattended with them here." "Who knows what they might do?" Gabriel understood her concern. "Then I'll go alone. You stay and keep watch. Don't confront them, just make sure they don't cause any damage." "Be careful," Willow urged. "Dawson won't take kindly to being exposed as a forger." "I'll bring the sheriff back with me," Gabriel promised. He leaned down from his saddle to kiss her quickly. "Keep that rifle handy, but don't use it unless absolutely necessary." "The same goes for you and that colt," she replied with a worried smile. Gabriel rode out immediately, pushing his horse hard toward town. Willow watched until he was out of sight, then turned her attention to monitoring Bailey and his men from a distance. They seemed to be taking their time, stopping frequently to consult maps and drive stakes into the ground along what had always been the accepted property line. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when Willow noticed smoke rising from the direction of the eastern meadow. Heart pounding, she mounted her mare and rode toward it, fearing Bailey's men had set fire to the dry grass, whether accidentally or deliberately. As she crested a small rise, she saw the source of the smoke, a controlled campfire where Bailey and his men were now gathered, apparently settling in for a meal. Their presence on her land was infuriating, but at least they weren't burning her pastures. She was about to turn back toward the house when a glint of metal caught her eye. One of Bailey's men was hammering something into a tree at what had always been the corner marker of her property. With growing alarm, Willow realized they were placing new boundary markers a full 100 yards inside what had always been her land. This was no mere inspection. They were actively attempting to redraw the property line, encroaching significantly on her ranch. And the area they were claiming included the site they'd selected for the new well. Fury overcame caution. Willow rode directly toward the group, her rifle across her lap. The men looked up as she approached, some reaching instinctively for their weapons. "That's far enough, Miss Montgomery," Bailey called, rising from his place by the fire. "No need for unpleasantness." "You're placing markers on my land," Willow said, her voice tight with anger. "That goes well beyond inspection." Bailey shrugged. "Just establishing the correct boundary according to our surveys. If you have a complaint, take it up with the territorial court." His smile was cold. "Though I hear those cases can take months, even years, to resolve." "You know very well this is my property," Willow said. "The boundary has been marked and respected for decades." "Has it?" Bailey made a show of examining a document from his saddlebag. "Our records show an adjustment was made in '66 that was never properly recorded. We're simply correcting a long-standing error." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a lie that would be difficult and expensive to disprove in court, exactly as Dawson had intended. "Remove those markers and get off my land," Willow demanded, her grip tightening on her rifle. The men exchanged glances, and Willow realized with a chill that they had been hoping for exactly this confrontation. If she threatened them while they were operating under what appeared to be legal authority, She would be the one facing charges. Bailey's smile widened. Are you threatening us, Miss Montgomery? While we're executing a legal court order, that would be a serious offense. Willow knew she was being baited but couldn't see a way out of the trap. If she backed down, she tacitly accepted their false boundary markers. If she confronted them, she risked arrest. The tense standoff was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Willow turned, relief flooding through her at the sight of Gabriel, accompanied not only by Sheriff Parker but also by Judge Wilson himself. The latter's judicial dignity somewhat diminished by the dust of hard riding. "What's going on here, Bailey?" the sheriff demanded as they reined in. "Judge Wilson tells me he never signed any inspection order for the Montgomery property." Bailey's face paled slightly, but he rallied quickly. "Must be some misunderstanding. I have the order right here, signed and sealed." He produced the document he'd shown Willow earlier. Judge Wilson, a white-haired man with piercing eyes, took the paper and examined it briefly. "This is a forgery," he announced flatly. "A poor one at that. I never signed this, and the court seal is clearly counterfeit." "But Mr. Dawson said," one of Bailey's men began before Bailey silenced him with a sharp look. "I don't know anything about a forgery," Bailey insisted. "We were given this document in good faith." "By Theodore Dawson?" the sheriff asked, his expression skeptical. Bailey's silence was answer enough. "Remove those boundary markers immediately," Judge Wilson ordered, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "Then you and your men will accompany Sheriff Parker back to town to make formal statements about how you came to be in possession of a forged court document." "You can't," Bailey began. "I can and I am," the judge interrupted. "Unless you'd prefer to be charged as an accomplice to forgery rather than merely a dupe. That would mean prison, Mr. Bailey, not just a fine." The fight seemed to go out of Bailey. He nodded to his men, who began reluctantly removing the markers they'd placed. "This isn't over," Bailey muttered as he passed Willow. "Dawson won't give up that easily." "Neither will I," she replied steadily. Once Bailey and his men had been escorted away by the sheriff, Judge Wilson turned to Willow with a concerned expression. "This is a serious matter, Miss Montgomery. Forgery of court documents is a grave offense. I'll be calling Theodore Dawson to account for this, you may be certain." "Thank you, Your Honor," Willow said sincerely, "though I doubt Mr. Dawson will admit involvement." "Perhaps not," the judge conceded. "But this incident will be recorded, and it establishes a pattern of harassment that will strengthen your position should further legal issues arise." He glanced at Gabriel with approval. "Your friend here showed good judgment in coming directly to me. The law may move slowly sometimes, but it does move." After the judge had departed, promising to keep a close eye on any future legal maneuvers by Dawson, Willow and Gabriel were finally alone. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in gold and crimson, not unlike the night of the thunderstorm. "Thank you," Willow said, her voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't," Gabriel closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "You would have found another way," he said, echoing his words from days earlier. "You're the most resourceful woman I've ever known." "Maybe," she admitted with a small smile, "but I'm glad I didn't have to." She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "This fight isn't yours, Gabriel. Dawson is my problem, not yours." "He became my problem the moment I decided to stay," Gabriel replied firmly. "And I have decided, Willow. If you'll have me, I want to remain here not just for a few more days or weeks, but for good." The words she'd hoped for but hardly dared expect took her breath away. "Are you certain? This ranch can barely support one person right now, let alone two, and Dawson won't stop coming after us." "I'm certain about you," Gabriel said simply. "The rest we'll figure out together." His eyes held hers, honest and direct. I've spent 10 years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But something happened when I arrived here when I met you. For the first time, I found someone worth staying for. Willow's heart felt too full for her chest. I never expected you, she whispered. A mysterious cowboy arriving before dawn with exactly the sum I needed. It seemed like something from a dime novel, not real life. Gabriel smiled. Does that make me the hero of the story? I think it makes us both the heroes of our own story, Willow replied, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. And I'd like very much for that story to continue. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the last light of day faded into dusk. Then it will, he promised. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The weeks that followed brought both challenges and unexpected joys. True to Gabriel's prediction, Dawson did not give up easily. Having failed with direct intimidation and forged legal documents, he turned to more subtle methods, spreading rumors in town that made it difficult for Willow to sell her cattle at fair prices, pressuring the general store to extend less credit to the Montgomery ranch, even attempting to lure Gabriel away with offers of better-paying work elsewhere. None of it worked. The people of Enid, while initially scandalized by Gabriel's presence at the ranch, gradually came to accept the situation, especially after Reverend Thomas, a progressive-minded young minister, paid a social call and departed expressing his approval of the industrious partnership he had observed. The well they dug struck water at 40 feet, providing a reliable source for the cattle independent of the creek Dawson had dammed. Gabriel's knowledge of ranching, gleaned from years of working cattle across the West, proved invaluable in improving the productivity of Willow's modest herd. And each evening they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset and planning for their future, together on the land Willow loved. It was on such an evening, nearly 2 months after Gabriel's arrival, that he finally asked the question that had been in his eyes for weeks. "Willow Montgomery," he said, taking her hands in his as they sat side by side on the porch steps, "I came here to repay a debt and found the home I never knew I was searching for. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Willow's heart soared even as practical concerns surfaced. "What about the ranch? If we marry, by law it would become yours, not mine." Gabriel shook his head. "Not if we draw up papers beforehand, specifying that the property remains yours alone. Judge Wilson would witness them." "You've thought about this," Willow said, touched by his understanding of what the ranch meant to her. "I've thought of little else for weeks," Gabriel admitted with a smile. "I want to build a life with you, Willow, on your terms. This land is your legacy, and I would never take that from you." Tears welled in Willow's eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Gabriel James." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, the challenges they would face together, the home they would build, the love that had brought them together against all odds. They were married the following month in a simple ceremony at the ranch, Judge Wilson officiating and a small gathering of townspeople in attendance. Even Mrs. Whitaker from the general store came, her initial disapproval apparently overcome by romantic sentiment, and the excellent cake Willow had baked for the occasion. Theodore Dawson was not invited, of course, but his absence did nothing to dim the joy of the day. Under the same oak tree where Gabriel had first handed Willow the pouch of gold that saved her ranch, they exchanged vows to love, honor, and cherish one another for all their days. "I take you, Willow Montgomery, to be my wife," Gabriel said, his voice steady and sure. "To stand beside you in all things, to share your burdens and your joys, from this day forward until my last breath." "I take you, Gabriel James, to be my husband," Willow replied, her eyes shining with happiness. to welcome you into my heart and my home, to build a life of purpose and love together, for all the days that remain to us." Simple bands of gold sealed their promises, and Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction. "Now, about those property papers," the judge said after the ceremony, producing documents from his coat. "I've drawn these up according to your specifications. They establish that while Gabriel becomes your legal husband, the Montgomery Ranch remains solely in your name, Willow." Gabriel signed without hesitation, his bold signature a final proof of his respect for Willow's independence. The judge and Sheriff Parker witnessed the document, making it as legally binding as possible in the territorial system. "I doubt Dawson will challenge this directly," Judge Wilson said, folding the papers carefully. "But it provides you with some protection should he try more underhanded tactics." As if summoned by his name, Theodore Dawson himself appeared at the edge of the gathering, his thin face set in lines of displeasure. A murmur ran through the wedding guests at his unwelcome arrival. "Mr. Dawson," Willow said coolly, conscious of Gabriel's protective presence beside her. "This is a private celebration." "So I see," Dawson replied, his gaze taking in the wedding decorations and the official-looking papers in Judge Wilson's hands. "I simply came to offer my congratulations and to deliver some news you might find interesting." Gabriel's hand tightened on Willow's. "Whatever it is can wait for another day." "I think not," Dawson countered with a thin smile. "You see, I've just received word that the Territorial Land Commission is reviewing all property grants made during the early settlement period, including the original Montgomery claim." Judge Wilson stepped forward, his expression stern. "That's a private legal matter, Dawson, not something to be discussed at a wedding celebration." "Perhaps," Dawson conceded with false graciousness, "but I thought the happy couple should know that there. Arrangement regarding property ownership may soon be moot." He looked directly at Willow. "When the commission finds the irregularities I've brought to their attention, this land may not be yours to keep or to sign away." Before anyone could respond, Sheriff Parker moved to Dawson's side. "I think you've said enough, Theodore. Time for you to leave." For a moment, it seemed Dawson might argue, but faced with the disapproving stares of the entire gathering, he merely offered a mocking bow. "My best wishes to the bride and groom. May your happiness be as enduring as your claim to this land." With that parting shot, he turned and walked away, leaving a cloud of unease over the celebration. "Don't let him spoil your day," Judge Wilson urged, placing a comforting hand on Willow's arm. "Dawson is grasping at straws." "The Montgomery claim is one of the most solid in the territory." Willow nodded, determined not to let Dawson's spite diminish her joy. "Thank you, Your Honor. We won't allow him to cast a shadow over today." True to her word, Willow put Dawson from her mind as the celebration continued. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and the warm wishes of neighbors who had finally accepted that Willow Montgomery, now Willow James, though she kept her maiden name for the ranch business, was not merely an eccentric woman playing at being a rancher, but a determined landowner with a capable partner by her side. Later that night, when the guests had departed and they were alone in the house that was now truly their home, Gabriel held Willow close in the darkness of their bedroom. "Are you worried about what Dawson said?" he asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Willow considered the question seriously. "I'm concerned," she admitted. "Dawson has influence, and the Territorial Land Commission is notoriously susceptible to pressure. But no, I'm not worried, not tonight." She propped herself up on one elbow to look down at her husband's face, illuminated by moonlight streaming through the window. "Tonight, I'm Mrs. Gabriel James, and that's all that matters to me." His smile was tender as he reached up to trace the curve of her cheek. "And I'm the luckiest man in Oklahoma Territory. Whatever Dawson tries next, we'll face it together." "Together," Willow agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of all the tomorrows stretching before them. As it happened, they didn't have to wait long for Dawson's next move. 3 days after the wedding, a letter arrived from the Territorial Land Commission, requesting that Willow appear in Oklahoma City to present documentation supporting her claim to the ranch. "This is ridiculous," Gabriel said, reading the notice over her shoulder. "Your grandfather's claim was established decades ago." "Dawson must have friends on the commission," Willow replied, her voice tight with anger. "He's trying to tie us up in bureaucracy, force us to leave the ranch unattended while we travel to the capital." Gabriel studied the letter thoughtfully. "We don't both need to go. I could represent you." "No," Willow interrupted firmly. "This is my fight and my land. I need to be there myself." She glanced up at him with a small smile. "Though I'd welcome your company, of course." The journey to Oklahoma City took 3 days by wagon, over roads rutted by spring rains and summer heat. They brought all the documentation they could find: the original land grant, tax receipts, surveys, even Willow's grandfather's journal detailing the early years of settlement. The Territorial Land Commission offices were housed in a grand new building that seemed designed to intimidate ordinary citizens. Willow straightened her best dress, the same one she'd worn for her wedding, and squared her shoulders before entering, Gabriel a reassuring presence beside her. The hearing was as biased as they had feared. The commissioners, 3 men in formal suits with expressions of bureaucratic indifference, listened to Willow's presentation with minimal interest, then spent considerably longer reviewing a written submission from Theodore Dawson, claiming that the original Montgomery grant had incorrectly included land that should have been part of the adjacent parcel now owned, conveniently, by Dawson himself. "These allegations are serious," the lead commissioner said after they had conferred privately. "We will need to conduct a thorough review, including a new survey of the property in question." "How long will that take?" Willow asked, trying to keep frustration from her voice. The commissioner consulted a ledger. "We could schedule a survey team, let me see, perhaps in February or March of next year." 6 months from now," Gabriel interjected, disbelief evident in his tone. "Meanwhile, what happens to the disputed property?" "Standard procedure is to place a hold on all improvements or alterations to the land in question until ownership is determined," another commissioner replied smoothly. "Of course, current occupants may continue normal usage." Willow understood immediately what this meant. She could continue living in the house and working the ranch, but couldn't dig new wells, build new structures, or make any improvements that might increase the property's value, the very things she and Gabriel had planned to do over the winter. "This is exactly what Dawson wanted," she said quietly to Gabriel as they left the hearing, "to freeze us in place while he works on his next move." Gabriel's jaw was set in a hard line. There must be a way to appeal to expedite the process. "Perhaps," Willow conceded. "But appeals cost money we don't have in abundance." They spent another day in Oklahoma City, consulting with a lawyer who specialized in territorial land disputes. His advice was discouraging but realistic. Fighting the commission's decision would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success. "Your best option," he told them frankly, "is to gather additional documentation supporting your boundary claims. Old letters, statements from neighbors who have known the property lines for years, anything that establishes long-term recognition of your borders." It wasn't the solution they had hoped for, but it was something to work with. They returned to Enid with a new determination to build their case and thwart Dawson's latest attack. What they found upon their return, however, nearly broke Willow's spirit. While they had been away, someone had set fire to the barn. The structure wasn't completely destroyed. A rainstorm had apparently doused the flames before they could consume everything, but the damage was extensive. "Dawson," Gabriel said grimly as they surveyed the charred timbers and sodden hay. "This has his mark all over it." Willow nodded, too heartsick for words. The barn had been one of the first structures her grandfather built, its massive beams cut from trees that no longer grew in the area. Its loss felt personal, a direct attack on her family's legacy. "We'll rebuild," Gabriel said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Better than before." Willow leaned into his strength, grateful beyond words for his presence. "Is that even allowed with the Commission's hold on improvements?" "Replacing an existing structure that was damaged isn't an improvement, it's a restoration," Gabriel replied firmly. "And if Dawson wants to argue the point, he'll have to admit knowledge of the fire." The logic was sound, but the work would be immense. They needed to salvage what they could from the damaged barn, source new lumber, and rebuild before winter set in, all while maintaining the regular ranch operations and continuing to gather evidence for their case with the Land Commission. It was Judge Wilson who provided unexpected help. When he heard about the fire and their predicament, he organized a barn raising, calling on the long tradition of community assistance that was the backbone of frontier life. "Dawson's made himself some enemies over the years," the judge explained when a skeptical Willow questioned whether anyone would actually come. "Folks may have been slow to accept your unconventional ways, my dear, but they respect your determination, and they despise a bully." The judge proved right. On the appointed day, wagons began arriving at dawn. Farmers and townspeople, merchants and laborers, even the young minister and several of his congregation. They brought tools, lumber, food for the workers, and a spirit of shared purpose that transformed what could have been a crushing setback into a community celebration. By sunset, a new framework stood where the damaged barn had been, stronger and sturdier than the original. As lanterns were lit for the evening meal, Willow stood with Gabriel, watching their neighbors share food and conversation with genuine warmth. "I never expected this," she admitted quietly. "After years of sidelong glances and whispers, to have them all here helping us." Gabriel squeezed her hand. "They may not have understood you before, but they respect you now. What you've accomplished, what you've stood for, it matters to them, whether they've shown it or not." Across the yard, Willow noticed Theodore Dawson standing at the edge of the gathering, his expression unreadable in the fading light. He had not participated in the barn raising, of course, but his presence, now uninvited but apparently tolerated, suggested he was monitoring the community's shifting allegiances. As if sensing her gaze, Dawson looked directly at Willow. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then his usual mask of cold determination returned, and he turned away, mounting his horse and riding into the gathering darkness without speaking to anyone. "He's realizing he's losing," Gabriel observed, having noticed the exchange. "Not just his battle for your land, but his standing in the community." "That makes him more dangerous, not less," Willow replied, a chill running down her spine despite the warm evening. "A man like Dawson, when cornered, will strike harder." Gabriel nodded soberly. "We'll be ready." The barn was completed over the next few days, a testament to what neighbors could accomplish when working together. With that immediate crisis resolved, Willow and Gabriel turned their attention to gathering evidence for the Land Commission hearing. They visited elderly settlers who remembered the early days of the territory, collecting written statements about the established boundaries of the Montgomery ranch. They combed through Willow's grandfather's papers, finding correspondence that mentioned landmarks and property lines. They even discovered an old map in the county records office that clearly marked the borders in exactly the locations Willow had always known them to be. Slowly, methodically, they built their case not just against Dawson's immediate challenge, but against any future attempts to question their claim. As winter approached, bringing shorter days and the first frosts, Willow found herself happier than she had been in years, despite the ongoing struggle with Dawson. The ranch was running smoothly under their joint management. The new barn stood strong against the prairie winds, and each night she fell asleep in Gabriel's arms, secure in a love that had seemed impossible just months before. It was on a crisp November morning, as they shared coffee at the kitchen table and discussed plans for the spring calving season, that Willow realized she had been counting the weeks incorrectly. "Gabriel," she said slowly, setting down her cup. I believe." She faltered, suddenly uncertain how to express what she suspected. He looked up, concern crossing his features at her hesitation. "What is it? Are you unwell?" Willow shook her head, a smile beginning to form despite her nervousness. "Not unwell, no, just expecting." Gabriel's expression transformed as understanding dawned. "Expecting, you mean?" "A baby," Willow confirmed, her voice steadier now. "Our baby, probably in late spring." For a moment, Gabriel seemed frozen in place. Then he was around the table in 2 strides, lifting Willow from her chair and spinning her in a circle that left them both laughing and breathless. "A baby," he repeated when he finally set her down, his hands gentle on her waist. "I never thought. That is, I hoped someday, but so soon." "Are you happy then?" Willow asked, though his reaction had made the question nearly unnecessary. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Gabriel replied, pressing his forehead to hers. "Willow Montgomery James, you have given me more in these few months than I dreamed possible in all my years of wandering. A home, a purpose, your love, and now a child." His joy was infectious, pushing aside Willow's practical concerns about adding a baby to their already complicated lives. There would be time enough for worrying about the future. Today was for celebration. The news of Willow's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community, bringing an outpouring of genuine goodwill that further confirmed their changing status in Enid. Women who had once whispered behind their hands about Willow's unladylike insistence on running her own ranch now arrived with hand-knitted baby blankets and practical advice about childbirth and infant care. Even Mrs. Whitaker from the general store unbent enough to extend additional credit for necessary baby items, and to share her own grandmother's recipe for a tonic, said to ensure an easy delivery. The only shadow on their happiness was the still unresolved land dispute. February arrived with no word from the Territorial Commission, despite several letters of inquiry. Gabriel rode to Oklahoma City himself, only to be told that the survey team was delayed by winter weather and administrative backlogs. "They're stalling," he reported to Willow upon his return, frustration evident in his voice. "Whether it's Dawson's influence or simple bureaucratic inefficiency, I can't tell." Willow, now visibly pregnant, sighed as she eased herself into a chair by the fire. "Perhaps we should consider Dawson's offer to buy the disputed section," she suggested reluctantly. "It's only about 20 acres, and mostly the rocky ground to the east that's barely usable anyway." Gabriel shook his head firmly. "That's exactly what he wants to force a precedent, get you to concede even a small piece of your rightful claim. Once that happens, he'll find reasons to challenge more and more of the boundaries." "I know you're right," Willow admitted. "But I'm tired, Gabriel. Tired of fighting, tired of waiting. I want this resolved before the baby comes, so we can focus on our family without this constant shadow." Gabriel knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I understand, and I promise you, one way or another, we will end this. Dawson can't keep this up forever." But Theodore Dawson seemed determined to prove him wrong. As March brought the first signs of spring to the prairie, a new complication arose. The creek that Dawson had dammed the previous year, the action that had inadvertently brought Gabriel into Willow's life, was suddenly flowing again at full strength. This would normally have been cause for celebration, as it meant additional water for their cattle. But the timing was suspicious, coming just days after a heavy rainstorm. When Gabriel rode out to investigate, he found that the dam had been breached not by natural causes, but deliberately destroyed. "Dawson's men did this," he told Willow that evening. "But why?" "They fought so hard to deny us that water before." "Because now the creek is flooding," Willow replied grimly. "Did you see the lower pasture? It's turning into a swamp. The timing is deliberate right before calving season when we need that land the most." Gabriel's expression darkened. "And since we can't make improvements due to the commission's hold, we can't even divert the water or build proper drainage." It was a clever move on Dawson's part, using their own previous complaint against them. By releasing the water now, in far greater volume than the natural flow would have provided, he was effectively rendering a significant portion of their grazing land unusable during the critical spring season. "We'll have to move the pregnant heifers to the north pasture," Willow said, already calculating the impact on their operation. "It means less grass later in the summer, but we don't have a choice." The stress and physical strain of reorganizing the herd took its toll on Willow, now in her 7th month of pregnancy. Despite Gabriel's insistence that she rest and let him handle the heavy work, she refused to remain idle while their livelihood was threatened. "This baby is as sturdy as its mother," she declared when Gabriel expressed concern about her climbing into the saddle despite her expanding waistline. "Montgomery women don't break easily." But even Willow's determination had its limits. After a particularly long day of moving cattle, she awoke in the night with sharp pains that sent Gabriel riding for the doctor in a cold panic. "False labor," Dr. Miller diagnosed after examining her. "Common enough, especially in first pregnancies, but consider this a warning, Mrs. James. Your body is telling you to slow down." The scare was enough to make Willow grudgingly agree to limit her activities. She focused on record keeping and planning, while Gabriel took on more of the physical ranch work, occasionally assisted by neighboring farmers who had come to respect the couple's persistence in the face of Dawson's harassment. April brought the first calves and, finally, word from the Territorial Land Commission. The survey team would arrive in early May, nearly a year after Gabriel's appearance at Willow's door with the money to save her ranch. "Just in time for your confinement," Gabriel observed wryly when the letter arrived. Willow rubbed her swollen belly with a rueful smile. "Dawson probably planned it that way. He knows I won't be able to ride the property with the surveyors." "But I will," Gabriel assured her. "With all the documentation we've gathered, Dawson won't slip anything past us, even if you're occupied with more important matters." He placed his hand over hers, feeling the strong kicks of their child beneath. "And this little one is definitely more important." The surveyor and his assistant arrived on a bright spring morning, their wagon loaded with equipment and official-looking documents. Willow, now within weeks of her due date, welcomed them from the porch while Gabriel prepared to guide them around the property. To their surprise, Theodore Dawson himself rode up just as the survey team was preparing to depart for the first boundary line. He was impeccably dressed as always, his thin face set in lines of determined confidence. "Mr. Ross," he greeted the lead surveyor with familiarity that suggested prior acquaintance. "I trust you received the additional documentation I submitted to the commission." The surveyor, a weathered man with the precise movements of someone accustomed to measuring exact distances, nodded curtly. "I have all relevant materials, Mr. Dawson. As I explained previously, my job is to establish the facts on the ground, not to advocate for either party." Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I merely wish to observe the process, to ensure everything is properly recorded." Gabriel stepped forward, his stance protective though his voice remained even. "We have no objection to Mr. Dawson observing, provided he doesn't interfere with the survey." "Splendid," Dawson replied with false heartiness. "Shall we proceed, then? I'm sure Mrs. James would prefer to have this matter resolved before her." Happy event. The pointed reference to Willow's condition made Gabriel's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. "Let's start with the eastern boundary," he suggested to the surveyor. "That's where the primary dispute lies." The survey took 3 days of meticulous work, with Gabriel and Dawson following the surveyors from point to point across the property. Each marker was carefully measured, each landmark documented, each discrepancy between competing claims noted in exacting detail. Throughout the process, Dawson maintained a facade of cooperation, but his occasional leading questions to the surveyors and subtle attempts to reinterpret historical markers revealed his true intentions. Gabriel countered each maneuver with the evidence they had so carefully gathered, presenting a consistent and well-documented case for the boundaries as Willow had always known them. By the third afternoon, even Dawson's practiced civility was showing signs of strain. When the survey team confirmed that the creek, now once again flowing normally after its deliberate flooding, formed a natural boundary exactly where the Montgomery maps had always placed it, his expression darkened noticeably. "That doesn't account for the adjusted line from the '66 agreement," he argued, producing a yellowed document from his coat. "This clearly states that the eastern boundary was moved 20 yards west of the creek bed." The lead surveyor examined the paper carefully, then shook his head. "This document bears no official seal, Mr. Dawson, and is signed only by J. Smith, with no indication of who that might be or what authority they held." He handed it back. "I cannot give it precedence over the registered survey maps and multiple witness statements provided by the James family." Dawson's face flushed with barely suppressed anger. "The commission will hear about this bias, Ross. I guarantee it." "Document your objections as you see fit, Mr. Dawson," the surveyor replied impassively. "My report will reflect what we've measured and observed, nothing more or less." As they rode back to the house for the final consultation, Gabriel noticed Dawson drop behind slightly, his expression calculating as he surveyed the property they had just traversed. There was something in the banker's demeanor that suggested this was not his last move in the long game he had been playing. Willow was waiting on the porch, her face drawn with the fatigue of late pregnancy, but her eyes alert and questioning as the group approached. "The survey is complete, Mrs. James," the lead surveyor announced as he dismounted carefully. "We've recorded all boundary markers and noted areas of dispute. Our findings will be submitted to the commission next week." "And when might we expect a decision?" Willow asked, one hand resting on her rounded abdomen. "That depends on the commission's schedule," the surveyor hedged. "But given the thoroughness of our work and the attention this case has received, I would anticipate a relatively quick resolution." Dawson's thin smile held no warmth. Indeed. I'm sure we all look forward to putting this unfortunate business behind us. He turned to Willow with a calculating gaze. My offer to purchase remains open, Mrs. James. It would spare you further stress during what should be a joyful time. Thank you, but no, Willow replied firmly. This land will remain in my family for my child and, God willing, my grandchildren after that. Something hardened in Dawson's eyes at the reference to future generations of the Montgomery James line. As you wish, he said coldly. But remember, I tried to be reasonable. With that ominous parting statement, he mounted his horse and rode away, his straight back and rigid posture radiating frustrated anger. That man does not take disappointment well, the surveyor observed dryly when Dawson was out of earshot. Gabriel nodded grimly. No, he doesn't. And I don't think we've seen the last of his attempts to get what he wants. The surveyor regarded Gabriel thoughtfully. Off the record, Mr. James, I've been doing this work for 20 years. Your case is one of the strongest I've seen in terms of documentation and boundary evidence. I can't predict what the commission will decide, but the facts are clearly on your side. It was the most encouraging assessment they had received since the dispute began, and Willow felt some of the tension she had been carrying for months begin to ease. That night, as they sat together on the porch watching the spring twilight deepen into darkness, she allowed herself to hope that their long struggle with Dawson might finally be nearing its end. You think he'll accept the commission's ruling if it goes against him? She asked, leaning against Gabriel's shoulder. He considered the question seriously. I think he'll have to, at least legally, but will he truly accept it in his heart? No, men like Dawson don't admit defeat easily. Then we'll always need to be watchful, Willow sighed. Gabriel's arm tightened around her. Yes, but not fearful. This is our home, Willow, our land, and soon our family will grow here. His hand moved to rest gently on her belly, where their child shifted restlessly. That's worth any vigilance required. The baby arrived 2 weeks later, in the soft light of a May dawn that bathed the bedroom in golden radiance. After a night of labor that tested even Willow's formidable strength, their son was born a healthy, strong, lunged boy with Gabriel's dark hair and Willow's determined chin. John Montgomery James, Willow whispered as she held her son for the first time, honoring both her grandfather and the new life they had created together. Gabriel, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed at his wife and child, could only nod in wordless agreement. The name was perfect, a bridge between past and future, heritage and hope. The news from the Territorial Land Commission arrived a week later, delivered by Judge Wilson himself, who had insisted on bringing the official documents in person. Congratulations are in order, it seems, for both the new addition to your family and the commission's decision, the judge announced with a broad smile as he handed the sealed envelope to Willow, who was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch with baby John in her arms. Gabriel, who had been working nearby, hurried over as Willow broke the seal with trembling fingers. She scanned the formal language quickly, looking for the essential finding buried within the legal terminology. They've upheld our claim, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Every boundary, exactly as we maintained. The Montgomery Ranch remains intact, exactly as my grandfather established it. Gabriel let out a whoop that startled the baby, then apologized with a sheepish grin. Sorry, son. Your father's just a bit excited about your inheritance being secure. Judge Wilson beamed at the family tableau before him. I took the liberty of informing Theodore Dawson of the decision before coming here, he added. Thought you might like to know his reaction. How did he take it? Gabriel asked, his jubilation tempered by wariness. The judge's expression turned thoughtful. Better than I expected, to be honest. He was resigned, almost as if he'd already known what the outcome would be. Willow and Gabriel exchanged concerned glances. Dawson's apparent acceptance seemed out of character for a man who had fought so relentlessly for so long. "Should we be worried?" Willow asked bluntly. Judge Wilson considered the question. "Normally, I'd say yes. Dawson isn't known for graceful defeat, but there's something else you should know." He settled into a chair, accepting the glass of lemonade Willow offered. "There are rumors in town that Dawson's bank is in trouble, overextended on cattle loans that went bad with the drought 2 states over. If true, he may have bigger concerns than your 20 acres of disputed land." It was the first they had heard of Dawson having financial difficulties, and it cast his persistent attempts to acquire their property in a new light. Perhaps he had needed the Montgomery ranch not just to satisfy his ego or expand his holdings, but as tangible collateral for his own precarious financial position. "Is the bank likely to fail?" Gabriel asked, thinking of the impact such an event would have on the community. The judge shrugged. "Hard to say. Banking is a business built on confidence as much as actual capital. If enough people believe Dawson is in trouble and withdraw their money, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy." The irony wasn't lost on Willow. A year ago, she had been desperate to save her ranch from Dawson's bank. Now, the bank itself might be at risk. "I wouldn't celebrate Dawson's troubles just yet," the judge cautioned, reading their expressions. "He's resourceful and has connections beyond Enid, but it might explain why he seems to have accepted the commission's ruling with unusual restraint." After the judge departed, Willow sat with John dozing against her shoulder, contemplating this unexpected turn of events. "You think it's really over?" she asked Gabriel, who was reading through the commission's detailed findings. After all this time, all the threats and schemes, could Dawson simply give up? Gabriel set the papers aside, his expression thoughtful. "I think it's possible his attention has been forced elsewhere. But no, I don't think Theodore Dawson ever truly gives up on something he wants." He smiled at his wife and son. "Which means we'll continue to be vigilant. But we won't live in fear, Willow. This is our home, secured now by law as well as by right." The summer passed peacefully, a blessed respite after months of tension. John grew stronger each day, his personality emerging as a blend of his mother's determination and his father's easygoing strength. The ranch prospered under their joint management, the cattle fat on abundant grass, the repaired barn filled with hay for the coming winter. Theodore Dawson was seldom seen in town, his business increasingly conducted by subordinates. The rumors of financial trouble at the bank persisted, though no crisis had yet materialized. It was late August when Gabriel returned from Enid with news that confirmed Judge Wilson's assessment from months earlier. "Dawson's selling his holdings," he announced as he entered the kitchen where Willow was preparing supper while John slept in a cradle nearby. "All the land around us, everything he's accumulated over the past decade. It's being advertised in newspapers as far away as St. Louis." Willow set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "Everything? Even the parcels adjoining our property?" Gabriel nodded. "Especially those, it seems. The asking price is well below market value. He needs cash quickly." "For the bank? That's what everyone assumes." Gabriel hung his hat on a peg by the door, his expression troubled. "Judge Wilson says bank examiners from Kansas City have been reviewing the books for 2 weeks now. It doesn't look good." Willow thought about the implications for the community. Dawson's Bank and Trust was Enid's only financial institution. Its failure would affect everyone from merchants to farmers, many of whom had loans that could be called due if the bank changed hands or closed entirely. "What will happen?" she asked quietly. Gabriel shrugged. "Hard to say. Best case, another bank purchases the assets and continues operations. Worst case, depositors lose everything and borrowers have to repay immediately or forfeit collateral." The scenario was all too familiar, exactly what Willow had faced a year ago, before Gabriel's timely arrival. "There must be something that can be done," she said, her mind working through possibilities. "The community rallied to help us rebuild the barn. Perhaps some collective action could stabilize the bank." Gabriel smiled at her characteristic response, looking for solutions rather than dwelling on problems. Judge Wilson mentioned that several prominent citizens are discussing options, but it would take substantial capital, more than most people in Enid can raise. An idea began to form in Willow's mind. What about the man who's buying Dawson's land? If he's investing heavily in the area, wouldn't stability at the local bank be in his interest as well? "That's actually a good point," Gabriel said slowly. "No one seems to know much about the buyer yet, just that he's from Chicago and has been acquiring agricultural land throughout the territory." "Then perhaps we should make his acquaintance," Willow suggested. "When is he expected in Enid?" "Next week, according to Judge Wilson. He's coming to finalize the land purchases and inspect the properties." Willow nodded decisively. "Then we'll be sure to welcome him properly." The Chicago investor arrived with considerably less fanfare than might have been expected for someone purchasing half the county. Only his immaculate suit and the quality of his luggage distinguished him from any other traveler when he stepped off the train in Enid. Martin Hargrove was a man of medium height and shrewd eyes, his manner direct but not unfriendly as he was introduced to the town's leading citizens at a reception hastily organized by Judge Wilson. Willow and Gabriel, invited as prominent ranchers rather than for their history with Dawson, observed him carefully throughout the evening. "He's evaluating everything and everyone," Gabriel murmured to Willow as they watched Hargrove engage the town's mayor in conversation. "Not just making polite talk." "Good," Willow replied. "That suggests he's serious about his investments here, not just looking for quick profit." When Judge Wilson brought Hargrove over to meet them, Willow was prepared with pointed questions about his intentions for the land he was purchasing, particularly the parcels adjoining their ranch. "Cattle, primarily," Hargrove replied without hesitation. "The grasslands here are ideal for the improved breeds we're developing in Chicago. I plan to establish a model operation that demonstrates modern ranching methods." "That requires stability," Gabriel noted, "including reliable banking services." A flicker of interest crossed Hargrove's face. "You're well informed, Mr. James. Yes, banking is a concern. I understand Dawson's institution is troubled." "The entire community is troubled by it," Willow said candidly. "Many families and businesses depend on that bank." Hargrove studied her with new appreciation. "Mrs. James, I've heard quite a bit about you since arriving in Enid. Your reputation for straightforward dealing precedes you." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, then lowered his voice. "I'll be equally direct. I'm considering acquiring the bank as well as the land, but I need to understand the full extent of its problems first. Theodore Dawson has been less than forthcoming about certain aspects of his operation." This candid admission opened a conversation that continued long after most other guests had departed. Hargrove proved to be a careful listener as well as a shrewd businessman, absorbing everything Willow and Gabriel could tell him about the local economy, the challenges faced by ranchers and farmers, and the community's character. "You've given me much to think about," he said finally as the evening concluded. "I believe Enid has significant potential not just for profit, but for progress. The right kind of bank could be instrumental in developing that potential. The right kind of bank, Willow repeated thoughtfully. One that serves the community rather than exploiting it. Hargrove nodded, a smile touching his lips. Precisely, Mrs. James, precisely. 2 days later, the news swept through Enid. Martin Hargrove had purchased not only Dawson's land holdings but the controlling interest in the bank as well. Theodore Dawson would remain as a minority shareholder and advisor during a transition period, but effective immediately. The institution would be known as Enid Territorial Bank, with Hargrove himself as chairman. More significantly for the community, Hargrove announced that all existing loans would be honored under their original terms, with adjustments possible for borrowers facing genuine hardship. It was a gesture of goodwill that immediately established him as a different kind of banker than his predecessor. For Willow and Gabriel, the change represented something they had scarcely dared hope for, an end to the persistent threat that had shadowed their first year together. With Dawson diminished and a more community-minded owner controlling the adjoining properties, they could at last focus entirely on building their ranch and raising their son without constantly looking over their shoulders. "It feels almost too good to be true," Willow admitted as they rode the boundaries of their property a week after Hargrove's announcement. John was secured in a special carrier Gabriel had designed, allowing him to ride safely with his father while still too young to sit a horse alone. "Maybe sometimes things do work out as they should," Gabriel suggested, reaching over to adjust the blanket around his son. "Not always, but enough to keep hope alive." Willow smiled at the sight of her husband and child, her heart full to bursting with love for the family they had created. "A year ago, I was facing the loss of everything I valued. Now I have more than I ever dreamed possible." "As do I," Gabriel replied, his eyes holding hers with the same warmth that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "A home, a purpose, a family, everything a man could want." They rode on together, across land that was now unquestionably theirs, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them as they had faced the past year's trials together, with determination and love. Theodore Dawson left Enid that winter, reportedly for Denver, where distant relatives might soften his fall from prominence. The bank thrived under Hargrove's leadership, becoming an engine for growth rather than an instrument of control. And the Montgomery James Ranch expanded gradually, not through aggressive acquisition, but through careful stewardship that improved the land's productivity while preserving its natural beauty. 2 years after Gabriel's arrival with the money that saved Willow's ranch, they welcomed a daughter, Grace Montgomery James, named for Gabriel's mother, and carrying forward the family legacy that had nearly been lost to Theodore Dawson's ambition. Standing together on their porch on a summer evening, watching John toddle after fireflies while Grace slept in her mother's arms, Willow and Gabriel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of contentment. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't arrived that night?" Willow asked softly. "If you hadn't kept my grandmother's medallion all those years?" Gabriel considered the question seriously. "I think some things are meant to be one way or another. If not that night, perhaps another. If not that way, then some other path would have brought us together." "A romantic notion from a practical man," Willow teased gently. "You've changed me," Gabriel admitted with a smile. "Taught me that some things are worth believing in even without proof." "Like what?" "Like love at first sight," he replied, his eyes holding hers in the fading light. "Like the idea that a drifting cowboy and a stubborn rancher could build something lasting and true together." "Not so improbable as it turned out," Willow said, leaning against his shoulder as their son ran back to them, hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look, Papa," John exclaimed, opening his fingers just enough to show the tiny glowing insect. It's magical, Gabriel agreed, kneeling to his son's level. But remember what we said about creatures that belong to the night sky, John nodded solemnly. They need to be free. That's right. Gabriel watched as his son carefully opened his hands, releasing the firefly back into the gathering darkness. Some things aren't meant to be kept, just appreciated for the light they bring. Willow thought about the metaphor as they tucked their children into bed later that evening. So much of her life had been defined by holding tightly to what was hers, the ranch, her independence, her determination to succeed on her own terms. It had taken Gabriel's arrival to teach her that true strength sometimes came from opening her hands, from accepting help and love when they were offered. And he had learned from her as well that a life of constant movement could be less fulfilling than putting down roots in the right soil, that building something enduring required patience and commitment, not just freedom and adventure. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, not just a successful ranch or a loving family, but a partnership that made each of them more fully themselves while also part of something larger and more meaningful. As they stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit prairie that stretched toward the horizon, Gabriel wrapped his arms around Willow from behind, holding her close. "You ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The open trail, different horizons every day." He considered the question honestly, as was his way. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Responsibility for myself alone, decisions that affected only me." He turned her gently to face him. "But I've never once regretted trading that freedom for this life with you. Not for a single moment." Willow rose on her toes to kiss him, a kiss that held all the love and gratitude she felt for this man who had arrived with the money to save her land and ended up saving her heart as well. Outside, the Oklahoma night deepened, stars appearing one by one in the vast prairie sky. Inside the house that was now truly a home, Willow and Gabriel James prepared for sleep, secure in the love they had built together, and the future they would continue to shape, a future as bright and promising as the dawn that had brought them together on that fateful morning when a cowboy arrived with the money before sunrise.